Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of HR Leaders Live, the show where we discuss the future of work with today's most innovative and successful people leaders. The topic of today's show is, what is the future of learning and development in the workplace? To help me answer this question, I'm joined by three amazing guests. First up, we have Christopher Lind, who's the Global Head of Digital Learning at GE Healthcare, Simon Brown, who's Chief Learning Officer at Novartis, and Catherine Cape, who's the Global Head of Learning at Deutsche Bank. Welcome to the show, everyone. How are you all?
Very good, thank you, Chris.
Hey, thank you.
Doing well. It's Friday.
We made it happen.
We did.
If you guys knew how much it took us to get here, you'd be very impressed. Well, look, thank you everyone for joining us. I know you was all expecting us last week, but we're here now, and we've got plenty of questions to get into in half an hour. I don't know how we're going to get through all of them, but we'll try our best for all of you. So I think the first question I want to jump off with to you guys is, what's the biggest shift that you've seen in L&D over the past few years? We can start with yourself, Simon. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, you should have told us the questions in advance. So biggest shift over the last few years. So I think there's two shifts that I've been seeing. One of those is more towards smaller bite-sized learning when people need it, to quote Josh, sort of learning in the flow of work. So it's giving me what I need at the time that I need it to help me with whatever task it is that I'm trying to do, or whatever challenge or issue that I have. So that's sort of one direction. The other direction I see is going to longer term learning. So the greater use of MOOCs, massive open online courses, going to multi-week or multi-month learning to build out much deeper skills. So while both of those existed to some extent in the past, I think that's one of the biggest shifts, is to broaden that base of learning to give you that just in time what you need, and that much longer term reskilling, and way of developing much deeper skills over the longer term.
So I guess mine's probably, it's a continuation of a change I've seen, I feel, in sort of 25 plus years in L&D. The thing I've been really thinking about is the fact that the transition for us is about letting go of our egos. So if I think about when I started, people came into my classroom at the time I said, and I poured my wisdom into them, whether they liked it or not. And I was in charge of that, and I was front of house. And then we've moved in this world of curation and things to kind of trying to create an enticing buffet. So we have to go kind of back in the process. Even when we became coaches, we learned that, and facilitators rather than trainers, we learned that the less you do, the more they learn, which is kind of hard for your ego. And then gradually we're moving even more into the background. So we're much more about facilitating connections between people, or connections between people and resources, or people and processes. So I think it's been a really big kind of ego journey in L&D just generally. But I think as we get to much more of this, user-driven, user-created, co-created content, again, we aren't the people who know the right thing to do. And that's the biggest thing I think I've seen change.
Both of you, I think, hit the nail on the head. I think, Simon, what you talked about, I think about is, right, we're moving to this intelligent context of content. We have technology that's now pushing things in relevant ways, which is huge. And I think the big part that's a little scary about it, it's not scary, it's just hard. Like Catherine mentioned, it's less about us. And I think sometimes in L&D, it's been about, well, what do we think? And that's becoming less of a thing. And I think the part that is most fascinating about it is how technology is evolving it. That's taking us on this journey from what I would say is content to experiences. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're getting more to this era where people can actually have experiences in ways that they haven't before, which is helping people learn and develop in new and fascinating ways.
We already have a load of questions in the chat, guys, and we'll try our best to get through them. We have a question from David Doe, who's the Vice President of Talent Excellence at Shell. And David said, how are you tackling upskilling and reskilling given the rapid shortening half-life of skills?
Do you want me to kick off?
Sure, go for it. Jump in. Feel free to jump in, guys. There's no order here. Feel free to jump in with your thoughts.
I'm watching most of what Novartis are doing on LinkedIn. That's one way.
So yeah, I think we're definitely seeing that shortening of skills. There's two facts recently that I saw. One around 20% of the skills that we all have today will be irrelevant in 3 years' time, which is quite scary.
Wow.
And another one around a third of people have learned a new to world skill in the last 3 years. So new to world skill being something that didn't exist 3 years ago. So robotic process automation, data science, whatever. So I think those absolutely back up what it sounds like Shell is seeing as well in terms of that rapid pace of change around skills. So if I take our digital, which is where we're seeing this most, is in building digital skills, where a lot of those new to world skills sit. The way we've tackled it is to segment our audience, so to figure out who needs what, because not everyone needs the same, and then come up with a range of solutions to meet those different needs. So awareness for everybody. So something new comes along like digital, what does it mean, and how do we demystify it? Why is it important for the company, for our patients, etc.? For our leaders, what does it mean? How do they build it into their strategy? So that's a different set of solutions, much more hands-on, thinking about it. Back to experiences piece that Chris was just saying, experiencing, making decisions and changing their mindset from that. And then from the practitioners, that's much more around reusing things that already exist, because there's a lot of people out there who are much better and faster at building digital content than we are. So taking the things that exist out there from MOOCs, from other providers that can help us to build those skills, and that way we can give our people access to that faster than if we try and create some extensive reskilling program ourselves.
From our end, where we're looking at, it's a little bit of a twofold thing. And one is, right, moving more to this performance support mindset, because I think the skills are changing so fast that the ability for people to acquire knowledge and skills before they're obsolete is becoming hard. So how can we feed stuff to people so that they can get things done? I think the other piece, though, is we're prioritizing what are those human skills that automation and technology is not going to, eliminate. And I think that's where we can double down on some of these skills that are going to transverse the technological barriers. And I think it's a little more predictive in the things we're investing in versus being reactive, which is a shift.
Yeah, and I feel like I've got a combination of the two, in that we're looking at, for us, our focus is our leaders and our learners, and how do we help them with digital fluency. And we're thinking about digital fluency as both kind of technological skills and things that, 10 years ago I'd have said, well, that's not my business, that's the IT department's job, and the human thing. So how do you get that balance of, I can find data literacy and I build my curiosity or build my resilience in the same package? I think that's what we're working towards, really.
Do you have a part of David's question? He was asking, are you using any market insights on skills to help see which ones are expiring and which ones are going to remain consistent?
Good question. So I guess we put or developed our own skills and knowledge framework over the last 2 years or so. So that's given us a view of what are the critical skills that we need. Many of those will exist externally. And then we're looking at what the usage is against some of those key areas. So we've recently launched a couple of catalogues of additional learning for our people, and we're keeping a big track on what are the hot topics coming out of that. Not surprisingly, we're seeing data science and related ones is one of the hot areas. Interestingly, the other area we're seeing is related to our culture and around unboss, which is our sort of concept around servant leadership. And we're seeing that the two hottest topics are actually those two. So we're looking at what are the skills that people need, and it's around sort of unbossed leadership and around data science. And then we can use that to gather our insights.
From my side, I actually one of the things I find challenging about keeping up on it is a lot of times by the time it gets to you or the research comes out, it's already outdated. So I actually spend a lot of time talking to other organizations, and it may sound old fashioned, but even just jumping on Zoom sessions with other leaders and just being like, what are you doing? What are you seeing coming down the pipeline? And we might not be there yet, but we know it's coming. And I think that's the power of people has been probably our biggest competitive differentiator.
Shows something, Chris, that all of us paused a bit with that question. I think, how do you pull together the insights from all your internal data sources, which with complicated organizations is never a simple one button thing, we're also having, I think these external conversations are part of it. And we have some really great relationships with some institutions who research. So I spent a bit of time with MIT recently, for example, and I think that's fascinating to go into that more kind of academic world and understand some of the work that's going on in that area.
One of the other questions Jax Wiley, sorry, put was, is there a push to move away from how many years a person has the skill towards the practical application of the skill in the workplace?
I love the way it challenges a room. I'm going to own up to being in middle age. It challenges a room with a middle-aged group of delegates, which I experienced not that long ago, when the facilitator walks in and is absolutely old enough to be your child, and then blows your mind with what they did, which happened to me a few months back. And I think it's really good at challenging your biases around how you can make perceptions about, well, if you've been, if you need to deliver to a senior audience, for example, in training, you need to be tenured and have had 10 or 20 years at the flip chart or whatever. And I think it's just, how do we get more of those experiences out there?
And I think is there a push today for us to move there? I don't know that push is hitting us yet. I think as we start to be able to have more data and analytics behind what people's experiences actually mean, right now we're still in some cases limited from well, they have this many years in this, but that doesn't tell us the story of what diversity have they had within that experience. I think as we have more data points feeding in from these technology pieces, it is going to become a push.
Yeah, for me, years of experience is not a good gauge around skill set. That you can have many years of using something at a very basic level through to a very intensive experience of doing something for 3 months or 6 months, but actually you could be more expert at it. Do something with the local Boy Scouts here recently, and they were coming up with business ideas, and one of them said, I built my business idea on my passion, which is machine learning. It's like 12 years old.
Really? Wow.
Machine learning.
Wow.
And he sounded incredibly well informed about some of the aspects of it. So he, on the CV, he's probably got 0 years experience, but he sounded more knowledgeable than many people I've spoken to on the subject.
So you've enrolled into a future program, have you, for joining the firm?
Exactly. Yeah. Early recruitment.
On that point, someone asked, and this is a bit of a tough question. Jiang Hughes said, how do you bring the L&D progress that you are developing down to our schools and help the future generations, so it's not just a divide to leave formal education to come into the work environment?
So what's funny is I was started as a math teacher, and I actually still learn a lot I stay connected to a lot of the folks in K-12, because I actually learn a lot and some of the innovations that come out of there, because teachers are scrappy, right? They have no budgets, they have no things to do. And some of the things, so I think there's opportunity for us to better collaborate with educators, but I'm actually fascinated sometimes by, my kid comes home and has got this app on his thing, and that's where the homework's coming from. I actually take some of that innovation into corporate. So I'd actually almost say sometimes it might be the reverse.
Have you guys done any work around that, Simon or Catherine? Any collaborations with?
We have there's a few things we have, ranging from, I guess, internships where we bring people in for periods of time to be able to spend time with the company and understand what we're doing, through to in some of our sites where we have programs where schools can come in and actually take part, probably more on the science side of what we do. So in particular, I'm thinking in our Cambridge site in the US, where we have an open lab where schools can come in and we take them through what Western company does, how our product work, what research and development is around and things. So it's a way of, I guess, giving early insight into a potential career around life sciences.
Yeah, I think what I think is really interesting is I think this is the place where all of our organisations, I'm sure, have a huge amount of work in the community, in our kind of corporate social responsibility activities. And what I've really been thinking about is how we connect that with the learning, and I think we can learn an awful lot, and a lot of that for us is with young people. So I think it's a really interesting piece around that, and I think that bridge of some of those human skills we were talking about just now is a really powerful one, because if we can build things like that resilience and curiosity in our pipeline, then that's going to set us up for the future for people who perhaps are more agile in their learning to be flexible as skills change.
One of the questions, actually, this one's from my co-founder, Shane, and he said, "Chris, you have to ask this to the audience." I promised him I would. And he's saying, as personalization has become more of a part of everyday life now, how are you providing your employees with a customized and personalized L&D experience?
So that's a big topic, I think, and for me, that's
a whole show right there.
It
Shane.
is, yeah.
He's smiling at me. He's smiling at me. He's smiling at me in the background. By the way, he's put his hands out like, "Yay!"
So, I mean, there's a whole load of things here, but I think for me, this is one of the huge opportunities we have around as a learning community. Is how do we use technology to get more personal around learning? Because there's one of the biggest problems we have. We have 100,000 people. We have 1 million plus learning items. If you take it in the broader sense, and maybe more than that, even how do you get the right thing to the right person at the right time for it to be valuable? And if you can't do that, then you've invested lots of time and effort in content or in capturing content that you're not getting the full value from. So there's a huge part to play, I think, in AI machine learning. There's a huge part to play in us in understanding better our people and their needs, which comes down to data and meta tagging and other elements. And there's a huge part in sort of linking all of that through to the skills that people need and their roles, role-based curricula, linked competency skills. And I could go on for a long time around that one, but at a very high level, I think it's a huge opportunity for us.
Definitely the biggie, I think, personalization at scale. If you think about the intimacy of, many of us who've been in learning for years will have had the intimacy of a one-to-one coaching session, and everything from that to the, we're not quite 100,000, but nearly as many. And, how do you create that personal feeling? Well, every vendor, respectfully, will tell you that buying their platform.
Catherine, just for 1 second, if you could unmute Christopher, both of you, because I think he may be muted on your side.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Chris,
Okay.
Chris, they can hear you now.
Okay.
Perfect.
There we go. So I just realized you guys couldn't hear him. So go carry on. Sorry to interrupt you, Catherine.
No, I was just going to say, I think every vendor would tell us, respectfully, that buying their platform is the answer to personalization. I think for us, it's stepping back and deciding two things. What's our philosophy around control versus freedom? Because historically HR functions have said we need to control all the content, and that's a new thing for us to allow it to freely flow using the technology. And the other thing I think we need to decide is, what does our kind of ecosystem look like? It's not about one panacea, we sign off one check and everything gets easy. I think we're going to have to get our heads around the fact that it's a different model of Lego bricks for each of us.
Yeah, and the technology piece and the letting go of the ego is huge. And one of the more basic, maybe it's more basic, but maybe it shouldn't be, that we've really are trying to push to help get personalization there, is really getting more outcome focused on, like, what are the outcomes, so that these frameworks and all this context that we're providing actually leads to something, and actually empowering people to figure that out. And I think sometimes people struggle with knowing what to do with all this stuff, and helping people understand these are potential outcomes of these things, but we're not going to tell you, to Catherine's point, exactly how you have to go through that. But if you want to achieve X or Y or Z, here's the tools, but find your own way.
And Chris, just one thing, I don't know if people have seen it, but my top recommendation of a TED talk is, there's one about desire paths. Forgive me, I can't remember the guy that did it, which is about town planning, where town planners spend ages deciding where the concrete path will go over a piece of grass. And then they show aerial photos and show how the humans have decided to go this way. Thank you very much. And that's what we've done with curation. We've decided you must go this way. And what our users tell us is they'd like to choose which way they go. And that's the bit we're trying to kind of navigate, I think.
When we first posted on LinkedIn that we're going to do this live show, I had every single vendor in the world send me a message on LinkedIn. And they're specifically asking me to ask you guys, how can they best partner with you L&D leaders like yourselves to create a better working environment and a more engaged workplace, and collaborate? That's one of the key questions that most of them were saying. How do we work better with learning leaders in organizations to build our platforms around their needs?
I think there's one thought that I've had for some time, which is something that comes up quite regularly, where someone has seen a product, maybe a great product, that's the one-stop shop for a particular need.
Isn't that everyone? Isn't that all of them claim to do that, right?
And if you've got only that need, then I'm sure it is a fantastic product for that one need. But when you start to work in a large organization, there are many products and there's an ecosystem there, and we're trying to manage that ecosystem so the right things talk to the right people with the right data, and making it as simple and simple for the end user as possible. And I think maybe understanding that situation would be a very helpful one, of where does this particular product fit into an existing ecosystem, rather than just seeing that product in isolation. And it may be fantastic at doing that particular onboarding piece or sales coaching need or whatever it may be, but it needs to fit into a bigger ecosystem. It's not a product in itself. So I think one for me would be around just understanding that ecosystem better. And it's almost certainly not going to be a one-stop shop, because there are 10, 15 other enterprise tools that are already there, and it needs to fit in somehow in a really joined up, seamless way with all of those things to be viable, not being a one-stop shop for that one thing, which in reality isn't actually a one-stop shop, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
I think that's probably one of the best articulated answers in terms of, right, help us understand how it fits into the bigger thing, because we all know it isn't just the one thing. We get it. In these big organizations, we know your tool isn't going to solve all our problems, but then that leaves us to have to figure out, okay, well, now we have to try and figure out how this may or may not fit. And I think having some help in that arena of how are other organizations using it in the mix of their ecosystem, and what spot does it fit, and don't promise that it'll do the other things. Like, just acknowledge your product's the best as it can be at that, and leave it at that. Don't tell us we can throw out our LMS if we bring in your micro-learning platform, because no, we can't. And it's just frustrating when you run into that.
It's interesting. The question had the word collaboration, and I think lots of vendors work very hard to collaborate with us. I'd like to see them work harder at collaborating with each other. Because often our barrier is, I've already got this, but you guys say you don't like these guys and you're competing, and how am I going to get your tech guys in a room with my tech guys? It's harder than it needs to be. So I think work together would be.
Well, and I think that's where what I would say with that, because I love that point, is this is where I think integrations are going to be the big focus for these. I feel like a lot of times the vendors are focused on, like, hey, we're the fanfare, we're the front page. It's like, no, you're not. And actually, that's the opposite direction of where we want to go. We want these systems to fall into the background and be more of just part of the employee experience, not the one more place we have to send folks. And I think that is that combination of, one, better integrate with our systems and better collaborate with each other, so you're working together instead of trying to compete for each other's market share.
There you go, guys. Everyone that sent me those messages, you got your answer. And I could have said that answer to them, to be honest, because I've had so many conversations with leaders like yourself, and it's exactly the same response that I get from everyone as well. So fantastic. One of the other key questions that keeps coming up is how do you encourage your people to take greater responsibility for their own learning?
That's a biggie for us at the moment. So part of our culture at the moment is around curious, inspired, and unbossed. So the curious part of that is a key piece around taking that accountability for one's learning, investing time to learn. So that's not something we have cracked in any way. It's a journey that we're on around how do we get people being more curious? How do we get people feeling the desire to want to learn, whether that's formal learning, informal learning from others, etc., etc. The way we're looking to tackle that as our next step on that journey is we're having a curiosity quarter, 3 months dedicated to curiosity, which culminates in our second ever Novartis Learning Month, which is a whole 4 weeks around global webinars, local learning events, promoting all of the great learning things. And we're hoping that will kickstart a bit more excitement, if you like, around curiosity, and get people excited about some of the great learning opportunities we're providing.
It's interesting, isn't it? We had a conversation at another event recently around engagement in learning, and often it falls into sort of campaign speak. And we did a big Learning at Work week a few weeks back globally, and it was hugely successful, engaging people in learning around the world and trying to promote this message that learning is everywhere. It's not always in a classroom or in a piece of e-learning. But I think there's something around how we help people to be confident in the kind of backdrop of this future of work and challenge around nervousness around automation, to say, actually, the way to really future-proof yourself is to create agility in terms of your ability to be more flexible and more curious. And actually, I think it's bringing those two messages together that will really help people. I'm not sure we've nailed it either, but I think it's how do we, weave these things together instead of it being, an initiative or a campaign, which I think most of us have done for a lot of years. We've been saying you're in the driving seat in HR campaigns, and certainly every company I've ever worked in. So it's how do we make it more, well, what's in it for the individual?
And I feel like learning and personal development, it's like exercise. Everybody knows they're supposed to do it, and they say they want to do it, and they just never make time for it. And that's part of our strategy, has been to really be intentional about, one, helping leadership make that clear to their teams that this is a priority. We want you to be spending time on this, and providing practical guidance on how to do it. I think, again, it's just one of those, sometimes people feel like, well, I don't have time, or I'll get to it next week, and next week turns into next month, and then it's next year. And so if we're just active and vocal about this is intentional, we want you to be intentional, and we're supporting you in being intentional in that. I won't say we've cracked it, and probably like exercise, there probably will always be a portion of the population that just won't. And we have to have a comfort level, but we'll just keep trying to make that percentage smaller and smaller.
I'm seeing the letters AIVR coming up in the chat a lot. Have any of you used AIVR at the moment in your organizations? If so, what are the experience you're having at the moment?
So can kick us off. So VR, yes, we're using it in a couple of use cases. So we're using it in Austria in a manufacturing plant for line clearance, where we've recreated a manufacturing line, and you have to go through a process around how you clear that down. You remove the medicines, the packaging, the inserts, all in VR, and it's a completely sort of recreation of what the manufacturing room looks like. Similarly, in the US, we're using it for onboarding around cancer medicine for children that we're doing there, to be able to actually go through the process of what you would do, and it's used for onboarding, and it's proved very effective in there. I think we had a 5-week ROI on there of payback, that we covered the costs in 5 weeks from the first example there. AI, we have had a few things. So we have AI live within our learning management system to do recommendations of content for people. It's not great yet, but it will get better as it learns more, and as the data gets better, and as we get better at tagging our content. We also have done some experiments around AI to actually help us curate content. So AI reading content, writing the course objectives, tagging it to keywords, linking it to skills and knowledge frameworks. I would say mixed success. Some pieces absolutely scary. It could have been a human wrote it. Other pieces completely gobbledygook that it came out with. So our conclusion, this was probably 2 years ago we did that, was that it has huge potential. You need to find the right way to use it. But yeah, definitely where things would be in the future, and some quite scary conversations around humans doing things, machines learning from the humans, and then not needing humans because the machines are doing it.
I think from our perspective, we've done a lot more for our customers than for our employees, is the honest truth. We have amazing brains who've done some really cool things in different parts of our organization for our clients, using virtual reality in branches, using AI to do all sorts of really interesting work. And we're really only just exploring that as we look at HR products. I think we also have it just going live in our LMS, and I think it will take us a little while to get it to be a really valuable thing from an AI perspective. From a VR perspective, not so much yet. And I think one of the things that's kind of challenging is around finding the right use case in an organization. I mean, my responsibility is for stuff that is across all our business areas, and therefore actually people's environment isn't similar enough to sometimes make the use case for VR. So we haven't gone there yet.
We're doing some runs right now with AI assisted VR to do soft skill development. It's a little complicated to just try and explain in 30 seconds, but I think it's showing tremendous potential in allowing people to have experience and develop in that arena. We're using AR pretty heavily. We're moving forward with it for sales enablement, and actually allowing our products to be, out there with the sales teams when you can't pack a MR machine in your bag. So I think that's cool. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. AI, we've got some work to do on our data sets before we really start investing heavily in AI. We don't want to just speed up bad processes and broken data. But where we are looking at it, and I'm doing some exploratory work right now, is in instant feedback for people. So AI is getting much better in voice recognition and being able to detect patterns and the way people speak, and then being able to provide feedback on you're nervous, you're talking too fast, things like that. You're using these words, maybe cut back and provide people a score. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's fully mainstream, but there's huge potential, and it's about finding the right opportunities to apply it versus just being like, oh, AI is cool, let's just do it here.
Can you share some of your failures that you've had over your career, and how you've overcame them to make sure that your L&D investment doesn't go down the drain? Similar to your point that you just mentioned, Chris, as well, because I think a lot of the leaders that are commenting are worried about doing so and investing in the wrong areas. There's a new shiny object that appears every day. It seems I get messaged by those guys every day too, telling me, can I come on the show and share my shiny object with everyone else as well? So how do you make sure that you're making the right investment, and maybe what are some questions that they should be asking themselves before they go ahead?
I'll say one of the things we've done really well, or are doing better in, is I call it the incubator, and trying things in smaller pieces, trying it in smaller environments, and seeing how effective it is before we make big investments. And again, I think sometimes innovation is not as complicated as we make it, and so it's like let's innovate, let's try it, let's see what happens with it, and be okay if it fails. Like, what is that comfort level with the organization of how much are we willing to invest and know that it might not do anything, and be okay with that before we scale?
I think that's definitely a key thing. I think invariably where I've made a mistake, it's been because I've thought I understood what a word meant. I think that even more it becomes really important to unpick. So here we go. LXP is about 70 different things in the market right now. So going, oh, you've got an LXP, brilliant, I'll sign a check. We're more and more at risk of the buzzwords getting in the way. So I think there's something about understanding the right terminology. And I think this experimenting in safe spaces. So we have something we call our innovation lab, and they brought in a really small startup with a product to connect our people for conversations. Our mystery coffee program, it's called, now is 13,000 people across the world. It's just a random matching. It matches you with someone in the same city in a different function for a coffee. 2 seconds, the algorithm, you put in your corporate title and your location, and it matches you with someone a couple of levels above or below you. And it just sends you an email that says, hey, Catherine, this week your mystery coffee is with Dave. And it's so simple, but it's had such a big impact. But we tried it using this lab system to make sure it worked before we've scaled it. And I think we've just piloted a reverse mentoring version, and we're piloting a job shadowing version. So it's about connecting our employees, but rather than going, whoa, let's do this globally, I think we've become much better at choosing small pockets.
Sounds like a great idea, by the way, the whole connecting with,
I love it.
That's great. In terms of like building new relationships, the innovation that comes out of connecting those different peoples that never meet before.
Yeah.
Just the problems that I'm sure you guys have solved by putting together the different
departments. I learned something every coffee I had.
I'm sure.
Definitely. Although I don't really like coffee, which is an issue. Mystery tea.
Virtual water or something.
Yeah. Martin Perr, Director of Learning Development at GSK. If I get that wrong, Martin, I'm sorry. I believe that's the case. He asked, is there anything we can do about people not having enough time? Because like we said earlier, people always say, I haven't got enough time to learn. People are telling us they're busier and busier and busier.
So I think there's a few things we can do in my mind. So this is one that I hear very regularly. So we've recently launched some new content catalogs, which the first thing that we hear back is how do we make time in order to do that? And we'll be announcing a little later in the year an investment around giving people a significant amount of time to actually spend learning and free up that time. So that's something coming later. I think the other part though is around us making sure we're understanding how our users want to access learning. when we're providing it. So it's not all about I have to make time in my day or I have to make time in my weekend to do it. And it's actually we all have dead time in our days that we could actually be using to be learning, whether that's podcasts in the car, whether that's time when you're sat at an airport or a train station or wherever it may be. So it's how do we use that dead time in order to be able to actually use that learning, and making sure we're being flexible around how we're giving people access to learning through mobile, through offline players, through other things. So actually you can fit it in when it's convenient for you, as well as building dedicated time in where necessary as well.
And I think sometimes it's about helping people understand. I think a lot of people, when they think of learning or development, they're still thinking about it in that very academic sense of taking a class, going through an e-learning, and it's helping people think differently about what development is. Because I think, in all honesty, if most people actually change their definition of development, they actually do have time, and they actually are spending time doing these things. They're just thinking about it in this box. And so sometimes it's about helping people expand their box of what they mean and being a little more intentional about it.
I'm going to say the ego word again. I'm sorry, I'm slightly obsessed, but we need to question ourselves whether I don't have time is code for your stuff isn't interesting enough for me to prioritize it.
One of the other questions that came through from the members is, it's a bit of a tough one, but what do you think the future holds? Where are we going to be sort of 3-5 years from now? What do you think that's going to look like in the workplace? With a tough one, but
yeah. So we did a session recently where we were trying to look for 5 years out, and what did it look like, and build on some of the themes and the trends that we're seeing today, and where could those go. So I think one was around greater access to knowledge. So we see sort of learning has been said many times, it's much more around formal. Actually in the future, I think it's going to be around a lot more accessing knowledge or people, as well as formal learning content, which will still have a place, but then I think a lot more partnerships. So actually building content ourselves. There will be certain things where that's necessary, but the speed of change that was referenced earlier, actually, why should many companies be trying to produce the same thing in parallel, trying to keep up with the trend, when there are either leading companies or leading institutions out there that are right on the pulse of what it is and can produce that content faster, quicker, and then we get access to it. So I would see a lot more access to partnership content versus producing it ourselves. And then, putting the learning where our users want it, where they need it, and when they need it. So whether that's what we were just saying about, having it wherever you want it in an ecosystem in a sort of Netflix type way, or whether that's more of a performance support, having it embedded in the systems that we're using day to day, where it's actually seeing what you're doing, seeing where you could improve what you're doing, and giving you recommendations, links, connect with so-and-so for a virtual coffee in order to learn about what they've just done in whatever. So that's, putting it where we need it most, which you could say is the sort of evolution of the learning in the flow type piece.
I actually had a call with some learning leaders right before this, and we were just talking about how where we're going is we're going to become the GPS of work. And that's where we should be going, is we're just kind of providing that guidance. And it's not about, to Catherine's point about ego, it's not about us and how great and amazing we are. It's about providing that guidance where people are and how they need it. And I think the technology is actually allowing us to do that, which that was a limitation for us 5-10 years ago. We couldn't necessarily get there. And I think in 5 years, we'll be able to do that much better.
And I think we'll be able to learn more from our users.
Yeah.
So it'll be much more about learning what they want and putting stuff where they need it. And so I think our teams were made up, and I think they're increasingly being made up of people who have a kind of data insights capability. But I think that will only grow, because actually what we need to do is learn from the organization in order to kind of provide back what's needed.
Yeah.
And that's, again, tech will help us do that.
A lot of people are asking that question, during the research you guys are doing. What are the skills that you've identified that are the most important that organizations will need moving forward?
I think the hot topic is very much the skills related to digital and new ways of working. So whether that's sort of data science, advanced analytics, whether that's more agile ways of working, those would be probably the hottest areas that we're seeing, both a demand for people with those skills, but also an interest from associates in terms of wanting to be building out and learning those new skills as well. And we need to make sure we're supporting them by giving them access to great content in those areas.
I think the complementary soft skills around resilience, helping people to be more comfortable with ambiguity, and therefore for leaders, creating that environment of sort of psychological safety for people to try new things. That kind of, those two things go together.
Especially when there's so much change happening in organizations now, you need leaders to have that set of skills. Yeah.
Well, and I see it's almost in some ways a combination of what Simon and Catherine both said, where it's like these human soft skills, but through the lens of digital. So I even think of communication. It's about communication is different today. How are we preparing people to be able to communicate and collaborate in this world where we aren't all in the same building and things like that? So it's still communication, which was a critical skill and always has been, but with this new bend and this new lens on things. And I think learning agility, I can think of a lot of those human skills that, we have to add that digital flair to it.
We see that at the moment. One of our popular courses is storytelling, but it's storytelling with data. So it's in the context of how do you tell the story from whatever complex data, and that's proving very popular.
And it is one of the areas which a lot of the analytic leaders I speak to struggle is to basically tell it in a story in a language that people can actually understand in the first place as well. So
and I think that's an interesting shift, that there are more things which are pairing skills that didn't traditionally stereotypically go in the same human. So a storyteller was not necessarily an analytical person in the past, and that's becoming a really valuable combination as an example. So I think sometimes there's something around complementary skills as well as just individual standalone that we need to think about.
Starting with yourself, Simon, before we wrap up, what's sort of one parting piece of advice would you'd give to our audience?
I think look at what your customers, if you like, within the organization want. So whether that's the end user and making sure that meeting their learning needs, or whether that's the business in terms of as a learning function, we're building out the critical business skills that they need to deliver against their business strategy.
I would say throw out all your definitions of what you think it is, and be willing to explore new stuff. I think that's probably one of our limiting factors, is we keep going back to what we've always known, and that's our human tendency, is to fall back to our comfort zone and just keep finding ways to push yourself out of your comfort zone, because I think that's the only way we're going to continue to innovate. Otherwise, we're just going to be falling back to what we've always done.
I'd say look outside your own organization. I mean, this is a great experience for me, but I think just generally, I feel like I made a conscious decision a couple of years ago not to just swap business cards or click LinkedIn, but to follow up. And I've learned so much more by following up and saying, if you've got half an hour, can we just talk about how you handle this challenge or whatever with peers in complicated organizations, not just in our industry. And I think that's sped up how we've thought and challenged our kind of traditional thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, that literally is the entire premise of my business model here. HR Leaders is to connect you guys together for that exact purpose, because we all know we should be doing it, and we all know the value of doing it, but we always end up, there's always something that comes up in the office that you can't get away, and you do need to spend time away from the organization in certain times where you get a time to reflect and speak to other leaders and where they are in their journey as well. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback I get from all of our workshops is that opportunity just to step away and have a conversation with their colleagues and see where they are and validate their own strategy with their peers. And some of the most amazing insights come from those conversations. So appreciate you all saying yes to me on LinkedIn and coming here today to join us at the live show. I'm going to say to the panel, don't blame me for the amount of LinkedIn messages you're all going to get. It's not my fault. You signed up for this as a disclaimer. Apart from that, thanks for tuning in, guys. And we look forward to seeing you all the same time next week. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.
Have a great weekend, everybody.